One of the most popular and intriguing Irish goddesses is the Morrigan, a figure who has appeared across mythology and folk belief for as long as we have written material from Ireland, and has even found a place in modern fiction. A powerful goddess, she often appears in older stories as an agent of change, encouraging warriors to fight and stirring up battle when it's necessary. In more modern understandings, she is a deity who encourages people to find their own sense of power and sovereignty, to face difficult situations and to embrace inner strength. Although she has a somewhat dark reputation among some pagans, most of that comes from later Christian recasting of the Morrigan as a demon or terror of the night. In the original material and among many of her devotees today, she is viewed as a strong goddess who acts in beneficial ways for those who follow her and for the wider issues she is connected to. The first thing to understand with the Morrigan is that her name is also a title, meaning that it is used as a personal name for her, but is also used as a title for other similar deities, most notably her two sisters. This can and often does cause confusion, and also opens the question of what the individual Morrigan's name might be, or if she has one. However, as a general rule of thumb, when we see the Morrigan acting as an individual being in a story, that is the singular being, while when we see it used as a title, it's either explicitly stated as such, or the being's other name is used first. There are two possible meanings of the name: Phantom Queen and Great Queen. The Queen part is undisputed, but the initial portion more is where the issue of translation comes in. In the oldest sources, it's always given as Morrigan, which would most likely translate to Queen of Phantoms / Spectres. More is thought to come from an older root word that means, roughly, spirits of the dead, and also gives us our modern word nightmare, originally a term for a supernatural being that tormented people's sleep. However, if the first part of the name is given an accent mark called a Sheena Fada, it is read as great, expansive, vast, giving us Great Queen. The second version of the name is found in later material, and it's unclear whether it was a genuine understanding of the name or a scribal error, but either way, both forms can be found today. Scholars tend to favour the Phantom Queen interpretation, while the Great Queen version is more popular among pagans. Both views offer insight into who and what the Morrigan is. A persistent question around the Morrigan is whether she is one individual goddess or three different goddesses. The answer here varies depending on a person's spiritual beliefs. In mythology, the Morrigan is a single deity in herself, but shares her name as a title with her two sisters, Badb and Macha. These three are referred to as in Tri Morrigani, or the three Morrigans. The Sanaz Cormac, an early source, describes the three Morrigans as raven women who stir up strife, implying that the three act together, which is something we often see across myths. In neo-paganism, some people have chosen to interpret this idea of three Morrigans as describing a single being who has three aspects, and others have merged the Irish myth with the modern idea of the maiden, mother, crone goddess. In many of the stories, however, we find the Morrigan acting as a distinct individual being, alongside her two sisters, Macha and Badb, as the previously mentioned three Morrigans. Together, these three powerful goddesses enact magic on their enemies, or incite armies to fight, and individually each has her own stories about battle, war and victory, and each is connected to sovereignty in different ways. The Morrigan, both as an individual and as a group, can be found across a wide array of Irish myths. The Labor Gabala Erlin tells us that she is a member of the Tuatha Dé Danann and is the daughter of Ermas and Delbreth, along with her sisters Badb and Macha. Her other three sisters are the sovereignty goddesses Eru, Banba and Fulda. Her husband is the Deida. She is said to have several children in different stories, although the most famous may be Maige, who had to be killed because his heart carried 3 serpents who would have laid waste to Ireland if they had broken free. This is perhaps a lesson in the harder choices we find in life, where the best strategy is also the most painful and personally costly. It also shows that the Morrigan is not unfamiliar with grief or loss, despite her fearsome reputation. The Morrigan regularly appears in stories in the form of a black bird, sometimes specified as a raven, but more often as a crow, specifically a hooded crow. The hooded crow, also called a skulled crow in older sources, is a bird that is dark grey with black wings, tail and head, so it looks a lot like it is wearing a black cloak. In the Táin Bó Cúailnge, she also takes 3 other animal forms, a red-eared heifer, an eel and a grey wolf. It's unclear if she might take these 3 forms more often, but it does make clear that she can if and when she chooses to. In several tales, she has a human form which is referred to as a rich in older Irish, implying it is a disguise, not her true form. These disguise forms include an older woman as well as a beautiful young maiden, and show up in stories where she is trying to trick someone into not recognizing her, usually Cuchulainn. There is also at least one reference in the Cath Maige that she is described as a hag, appearing in the form of a grey-haired old woman dancing over the sword points and shield rims of the army before battle. In only one story though are we given what might be her true appearance, that of a red-haired woman. This happens in the Táin Bó Cúailnge, a pre-tale of the Táin Bó Cúailnge, where Cuchulainn meets the Morrigan as a woman with long red hair driving a chariot who later transforms into a black bird. It's the only reference where her form isn't referred to in any way as a disguise. For those seeking her today, it is important to remember that she can take many forms and have various appearances, even when she is in a human body, and that she is just as likely to engage with a person as a crow or raven as she is to appear human. The Morrigan often appears in myths as an agent of change, encouraging people or circumstances to move in new directions or setting circumstances up to change the status quo. In the said Cath Maige Tuired, the battle against the Fiabolg, the Morrigan goes with the warriors to the field of battle and sets up a series of stone pillars so that the fighters cannot retreat, but must fight to the finish. In the Cath Maige Tuired, she appears to incite the vital action of the story, getting Lugh to move against the Fomorians who were oppressing the Tuatha Dé Danann through the half Fomorian, half Tuatha king, Bres. At the time, the Tuatha Dé Danann king Nuada was unable to rule because he had lost an arm in the battle against the Fiabolg, disqualifying him from ruling, so the warrior Bres was chosen to lead in his place. Bres was the son of a Tuatha Dé Danann mother and a Fomorian father, and once in power, he allowed his paternal kin to heavily tax and oppress his mother's people, causing them much misery. The Morrigan appeared to Lugh to encourage him to rise up and lead a rebellion against Bres. To do this, she used a specific type of incitement, a kind of spoken charm. Undertake a battle of overthrowing, so sang the goddess Morrigan, turning to Lugh. Awake, make a hard slaughter, smiting bodies, attacks boiling, greatly burning, devastating, the people to a man crying out. Her ploy worked and Lugh took up the cause, leading the Tuatha Dé Danann in a great battle against Brez, defeating the Fomorians and ousting Brez as king. Similarly, in the final act of the Táin Bó Cúailnge, the Morrigan appears to incite the warriors to break the stalemate that has formed, so that they will fight and ultimately end the great cattle raid. She does this by appearing to the leaders of the armies and chanting about a fierce battle and their ultimate victory. Emboldened by these words, the groups join in a final confrontation. In the Táin Bó Cúailnge, she appears as a woman driving a cow and encounters Cuchulainn. The two exchange verbal barbs before he is finally driven to try to attack her, at which point she turns into a black bird and continues to taunt him, prophesizing the forthcoming cattle raid of Cooley, which Cuchulainn will play a vital role in. The cow she is driving is also a vital component to that cattle raid, as the Morrigan has just bred it with the Don Cúailnge of Ulster, one of two magical bulls which form a point of contention that begins the cattle raid. The bulls are in fact shape-changed fairy men who have been engaged in a long battle with each other in various forms. By breeding the cow with the bull of Ulster and then taking her back to Connacht, the Morrigan is setting up the circumstances for the calf to be killed by Finnbhennach, the other magical bull which in some versions of the story is an essential aspect of the cattle raid. One might interpret her actions as causing the cattle raid itself, and also causing Cuchulainn to promise he would participate through a form of incitement. It is interesting to note as well that her arranging for the occurrence of the cattle raid also results in the final ultimate confrontation of the two magical bulls, which results in both of their deaths and ends their long-running animosity. While we might look at her involvement in their deaths and see it as a bad thing, we can also look at it as a kindness, because she freed the two fairy men from a cycle of constant competition and fighting that had them bound across a dozen forms. When we see the Morrigan acting to incite battles, it is often interpreted on a surface level as the Morrigan simply creating conflict and discord. Even the Sans Cormac, a historic source, accuses her and her sisters of stirring up strife. But I think if we look more deeply, we see instead that her actions aren't for the sake of causing problems in themselves, but are to move events forward, disrupt the status quo, and create changes that are ultimately positive. In the Cath Maige Tuired, her incitement of Lu while starting a horrific battle eventually results in the Tuatha Dé Danann being freed from oppression. In the Táin Bó Cúailnge, her actions ensure Cuchulainn's participation in the cattle raid, which is essential to the unfolding events and to the meeting of F2 bulls, and her stealing the cow and breeding it with Don Cúailnge may have been important in the final confrontation of the two bulls/fairy men. In the Táin Bó Cúailnge, her incitement of the armies results in the final confrontation between the groups and breaks the stalemate they were in. In all of these examples, the Morrigan is a force behind the events, encouraging action in place of inaction, and arranging events in ways that can be painful, but ultimately in a better outcome for at least some of the parties involved. The Morrigan isn't just a goddess who encourages others to fight battles. However, she fights them herself too, using both magic and combat. In the set Cath Maige Tuired, she appears with Badb and Macha, casting magic against the Fíorbolg to help the Tuatha Dé Danann win the upcoming battle. In the Cath Maige Tuired, she meets with the Déide for a yearly tryst, after which she promises to use magic to wound one of the Fomorian kings, which she subsequently does. Afterwards, she commands the Déide to strip his land, that is Mag Setni, against the Fomorians, and told the Déide to call together the Enes Dana of Ireland to meet at the ford of Unsen, and she would go to Setni and injure with magic the king of the Fomorians, that is Indech Mac Doman. his name, and she would take the blood of his heart and kidneys of his battle ardor from him. Because of that, she will give to the gathered host the blood in her two palms, striking, groaning, warlike by the Ford of Unsen. Ford of Utter Destruction was its name afterwards because of the magical injury done to the king. Later, when called on by Lu to say what she will do in the battle, she promises to pursue and kill enemy warriors. In the Dean Shah's entry Odras, the Morrigan steals cows from a human woman who pursues her back to the She of Croxon, the Morrigan's home, and when the woman won't relent, the Morrigan uses magic to transform her into a pool of water. From these examples, we can see that the Morrigan is not only a force of incitement for change, but also a being who acts to bring about some changes directly, both encouraging others to fight and fighting alongside them. We might argue from this that the Morrigan doesn't ask others to do things she wouldn't do herself, and that when she encourages battles, no matter how hard or bloody they might be, she is just as willing to fight those battles herself when needed. But she doesn't fight in place of others, rather she fights beside them as an active presence and an active force. The Morrigan is a goddess who prophesies and perhaps sees more of what is to come than others, which may explain why she shows up to incite change and knows exactly when and where to do so. But beyond encouraging those things, she can also offer glimpses into what is to come for her people. When the Battle of the Maige Tuired is over, she appears and offers two prophecies, one of peace and one of struggle. The peace prophecy is well known and begins: peace to sky, sky to earth, earth below sky, strength in each one, a cup overflow, filled with honey, sufficiency of renown, summer and winter, spears supported by warriors, warriors supported by forts, forts fiercely strong, banished our sad outcries. It offers a hopeful view on the heels of a hard battle, that the world will be a good place full of success and fruitfulness. In contrast, the second prophecy foresees a later period of strife when social order is inverted, evil is favored over goodness, corruption overtakes virtue, and society falls into disarray. The second prophecy has often been criticized as overly harsh, and some scholars have suggested it was a later addition reflecting the scribes', likely Christian, opinions, but nonetheless, it can have value in understanding the Morrigan. She isn't a goddess who promises us a perfect life after winning a single battle, but one who offers both hope and caution when looking to the future. She shows us that there can and will be times of plenty and victory, but that those are followed by further struggle, because life is a constant cycle of fighting and resting. One might argue that through this lens she is encouraging us to enjoy what we can when we can, and be prepared for what we must inevitably deal with to have that happiness. Sovereignty was a key aspect of Irish pagan belief, where we find that many of the stories about a king or would-be king needing the blessings of a goddess of sovereignty in order to rule. In one story, for example, several brothers encounter an old woman who asks each for a kiss. They all refuse except the youngest, who kisses her, after which she transforms into a beautiful young woman and declares that he will be the next king. In another tale, the king has a vision of the god Lu and a goddess of sovereignty in which he receives important messages about his rule. The belief was that only with the blessings of this goddess could a king and his kingdom prosper, and that if the blessing wasn't granted or was withdrawn, the king would quickly fall to ruin. Each of the named kings of the Tuatha Dé Danann was associated with or married to a goddess of sovereignty, showing that this idea was important beyond human kingdoms. The Morrigan is a goddess associated with sovereignty, although not in the more obvious ways that deities like Eru or Ani might be. Rather, the Morrigan is connected to sovereignty, not as a goddess who directly grants it, but as one who offers the opportunity to earn it and supports those who have it rightfully. We see this in her actions to bring down the failed King Blaise and to encourage Lu, who would become king after the battle with the Fomorians. We also see shades of this in her as the wife of the Deida, who was himself a king of the Tuatha Dé Danann and later a king of all the Sidhe of Ireland. Some might also see her aspects as a sovereignty goddess in her contentious relationship with Cuchulainn, who was too hot-tempered to be a king and who broke a treasure of the Tuatha Dé Danann, the Lia Fal, when it refused to cry out under his foster son as it would be for anyone meant to be king. Although the Morrigan's relationship with Cuchulainn is complex, she certainly didn't seem to favour him for kingship and often acted against him in various contexts. Scholars have argued that the Morrigan has connections to sovereignty through her purview of war, which makes and unmakes kings. She may also be associated with sovereignty through the specifically Irish form of warfare that is the cattle raid. These skirmishes, which, despite the picture painted by the epic tales, didn't usually have a high body count, were vital because they controlled where the wealth of different groups went. Cows were effectively the money of the time, animals which were rarely slaughtered but provided a variety of dairy products and related foodstuff that supported communities. To have cows was to have wealth and status, something that we can perhaps see in one of the only preserved references to a prayer to the Morrigan found in the Dínsha, where we find a man praying to her for success in a cattle raid, so that he may be able to marry the woman he loves. If this is who and what the Morrigan was historically, then where is her place today in a world that is very different from Iron Age Ireland? For the Morrigan is certainly still found today as an active deity and a force that moves both behind the scenes and more blatantly. But the world today is not the world that existed in the mythology or even the world that existed when those stories were recorded. And so too the Morrigan isn't limited by the role she played and the influences she had 1,000 years ago or even further into the past. She has evolved as her followers have evolved, and she has adapted as the world has changed. While we could still find soldiers today calling on the Morrigan, we also find people relating to her and praying to her over more personal battles. She can still be viewed as a deity of battle, but the battles she must incite or aid with are less epic and more individual. In the same way, while she is still a sovereignty goddess as much as she ever was, the sovereignty we find in the world today is less about kings ruling countries and more about individual agency and autonomy. She is a deity who can and will push us to face what we fear and to make difficult decisions that will lead to better lives. And she is a goddess who doesn't shy away from hard choices and necessary loss. Just as that man in the Dínsha prayed to her for his own success in a way that fell under her purview, we can call on her today to help us overcome challenges and succeed. The Morrigan across the stories is far more complex than simply a goddess of war and battle, although she is certainly those things as well. She inspires us to fight for ourselves and to meet our challenges head on. She shows us the power of looking into the future and seeing both the good and the bad that awaits us, and choosing to keep pushing forward anyway. She shows us that action and inaction are both choices, and that all choices have a cost, and urges us to choose well. She speaks to us today through the old myths and also through new stories, through novels and through our dreams. She is the sound of the crows cawing as they fly overhead, the cry of those defying their own oppression, the blood, sweat and tears we shed as we try to be more than our circumstances. She is the force that breaks through boundaries and the urge to defy limitations. She is, as a goddess of strife and of war, a power of life, a force which breaks boundaries and refuses to accept the status quo. And as such, she will always be with us, no matter how her form or stories change. The Morrigan is an ancient deity, complex and powerful, but she is one who is still very much in the world today, both in pop culture and neo-paganism. The past and the mythology shapes our understanding of her, and current engagement from modern devotees anchors her solidly in the modern world. Her name is given two different meanings, and while we might be tempted to see those meanings as contrasting or want to know which one is the truest, I believe that ultimately both speak to who the Morrigan is, both the Queen of Phantoms who rules the battlefield and its aftermath, as well as the great Queen who offers us a way to understand our own power and strength. She is not a being who can be limited or who can be easily digested. Rather, she is one made of nuances and contradictions, and is only by accepting that we can begin to understand her. She offers us a way to embrace our personal power, but only if we are willing to work for it, to face our own fears and move past them, because ultimately, sovereignty, even personal sovereignty, can't be given. It can only be earned. If you want to learn far more about the Morrigan, then we have the perfect books for you. The Morrigan and the Raven Queen by Morgan Daimler, who also provided the words for this video, collected together in a beautiful hardback edition. Morrigan, on shadowed wings and in Raven's call, meet the ancient Irish goddess of war, battle, prophecy, death, sovereignty and magic. An introduction to the Morrigan and several related goddesses who share the title, including Badb and Macha, Raven Goddess. Continue to get to know the Irish goddess of war, battle and prophecy, with a particular focus on distangling truth from common misconceptions. Available right now from Moonbooks Publishing. Thank you so much for watching. A special thank you to our members. You too can also become a member and gain early access to videos just like this one. Just hit the join button for more information, subscribe for weekly videos, ring the bell for notifications of when we post, and we will see you next time.